Hello, everyone. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the next session of the Compliance Alliance. We're here today we're happy that you joined us to speak to you today about quality intelligence and the data integrity topic, speaking about quality intelligence. Before we start off our session today, I do want to let you know this session is being recorded for quality purposes. We won't be releasing your names or your personal information, but we record these sessions for quality purposes and make sure that we can go back through them later on. As far as our session's going, we're going to be using an interactive technique today. So if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you should be able to see a chat button, a Q&A button, as well as polls button. So throughout our session today, we're going to be using chat features. Please feel free to write in here. I'm just going to put something in here. Hi, here is the chat. If you have any questions, if you have any points, feel free to put them into the chat, and I'll be narrating that throughout the day. So welcome all, and we're happy to get started with the great session. Before we get started, let me introduce my colleague, Dr. Ulrich Köllisch. Ulrich is going to take us through today data integrity, the human factor, and quality culture, and we're looking forward to a great session today. Like I said, the chat is on the right-hand side, the Q&As and the polls also, and I'll be moderating the back end of the call and making sure that we can answer all of your questions. And with that, Ulrich, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. And I'm happy that we got many attendees today from very different companies to this interesting topic. So today we continue in our data integrity series and having a look at the human factor. Before we get started, James, I would like to ask you a question. What do you think is the biggest challenge currently in the pharmaceutical industry?
I would say the biggest challenge is the supply chain and the drug shortages. If we look at a lot of things, we have a lot of issues in drug shortage to get the drugs on the market to the consumer.
Yeah, I think that is well said and true. As a kind of backstory, I've been to the States last week, where I gave a workshop in Boston. And when we took breakfast in our hotel, one of the first things we saw was broadcasting about drug shortages. We got women interviewed who cannot take her cancer medication due to the drug shortages. So it's a direct impact on the patient safety, on the patient's life. Now the next question: what do you think is the biggest issue which leads to the drug shortages?
From what we've been seeing on the market, it's really quality issues in the manufacturing, quality issues throughout the process. That's what we've seen as the biggest reason and the biggest root cause for drug shortages.
Yeah, and I think that's very true. And the case where it was about in this broadcast was about the Intas case, which was a 483 end of last year, I think, with 14 observations or something, with every kind, like out of specification, were not handled adequately, very much data integrity issues. And I think the root cause for this big quality issues goes always back to the human factors, to the quality culture. So the quality culture is not intact. This poses a huge risk that the complete quality management system fails. And therefore, I think it's a very important and very current topic. And I'm happy to share my thoughts today with you on the quality culture topic. Here's the agenda. I will give you a very brief introduction on data integrity with some quality culture aspects. And then we will go into the latest guidelines and the ISP and PDA guideline, what they can tell us, where we can learn something. Then I will show you concrete topics where you could get started and where you could act before we have a look into the future. James already mentioned the topic of quality intelligence, which can be enabled by an intact quality culture and functioning data integrity requirements or framework. So let's get started. I think almost everybody of you is aware that data integrity is very important, because in the end, our customers, which is patients, which can be severely sick patients, relies on the data. So therefore, it has a direct impact for patient safety. But of course, data is also supporting business decisions. So I think we should also stop always thinking about compliance, but bring those topics more together. We also need, of course, data integrity to respond to regulatory bodies in inspections. And mostly data integrity might be defined with complete, consistent, and accurate data, as the FDA did it in the Q&A guideline from 2018, fulfilling the Alcoa principle. Most of you heard of that, but this is not the point I want to go out. It's rather to say that data integrity is not a one-term fact, but it's a multidimensional temple, as we can see here, which relies on different columns. This is the first important point. And these columns are of different nature. We as consultants and industry tend to make a lot of thoughts about processes, systems, and procedures, which is very important, which we can call the hard facts. But there's also the human factor we want to talk about today, which is about people's mindset and quality culture. So if we investigate a bit deeper these columns, which keep our data integrity temple stable, then we can see that we got a mindset component. We can call this a data culture. Here, Henrizi made this term in the latest data integrity workshop of PDA. And this does not only mean that we are working correctly with our data in an Alcoa sense, but that we also see the value of our data. In other words, we do not see data as a burden, a regulatory burden, as it's in some instances done, pure compliance thought or pure compliance fact, but rather see it also as a value where we can work with and make informed decisions. So this is a mindset which should be implemented or intrinsic throughout the organization. The second part is then data governance, which defines our operations. So how do we want to handle data? What are the responsibilities and the roles, which makes up more or less the process and procedures factor. Here, I want to emphasize the FAIR principle, which means that data should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This is of particular importance when we want to use the data further, when we do not only want to achieve a document, but we want to have the data usable, interoperable between the different systems. Of course, we also need to have the right systems in place. It's the technical part. We don't want to discuss this today. But what I want to say is if we have the right basics in place, data integrity and the Alcoa or Alcoa Plus principle, however you want to define it, is more or less already the output. So people handle data correctly, they use data as a value, then you will also have less problems with Alcoa finding, let's say it like that, for example, in 483s. So this is a second very important point I want to make in this introduction. And as third point, I mostly refer in my webinars to critical thinking. I think most of you already heard this term. It's also kind of buzzword for the German speakers. I would also translate it with gesunder Menschenverstand, so that we're doing meaningful things more or less. This also means that we should be analytical. We should work on evidence and not on assumptions. The regulators are aware of this concept and they use it as it's outlined in the data governance part of the new PICS guideline on data integrity. And I want to highlight one thought additionally from this book, Black Box Thinking. In this book, the author compares the aviation industry, that's where the name comes from, where you have an incident, so a plane crashes, for example, then we have a very narrow, a very thorough investigation. So we need to find the black box and find out what really happened. This would be open loop thinking. However, in other industries, we often tend to, or under other circumstances of life, we often tend to think closed loop way. So we let us guide by our experience and by assumptions. So for example, in the healthcare industry, in hospitals, when an operation goes wrong or something deadly happens, let's say like that, many more people in general die than in planes. But there we don't have these narrow investigations as we have it in the aviation industry. So closed loop thinking is a problem, and I think it is also a problem in our industry. which can be related to predetermined root cause analysis, closed and meaningless risk assessments. I think most of you might have seen something like that. We're sitting in a risk assessment exercise and the output is clear. Let it be an FMEA, but the numbers have to be defined. This is meaningless because this doesn't bring any new insights. And it's also very much in line with the new ICH-Q9 to change these methods. And we then often tend to identify actions which do not tackle the root cause. For example, we have a not well-designed process. We don't have in mind to change it. So sometimes it's referred to retraining of the staff who didn't behave as the process said. Maybe there's a good reason for that, but this is then a meaningless remediation action. I think you see where I want to go with that. We need to break the loop and go into the black box scenario. So we have to really take data, explicit knowledge, as you can say, and solve the problems analytical with scientific methods. An additional factor for this is knowledge management. So we need to gather knowledge, let it be from data out of our company, but also from the outside, like scientific publications or exchange with other companies in order to reduce our problems. And one very last important point, we need to ask open questions and have open assessments, which are really not thought from the result, but thought from the beginning. So this being said, I want to go a bit more detailed into the human factor, and I have a little example or a case study with me. Here we got two warning letter findings. The first one is that the inspector found instances where electronic testing data was overwritten and original testing records were discarded. The HPLC software allowed to do this, which should of course not be the case. So this is case number one. And then we have case number two. The storyline is that during the inspection, it came out that something is wrong with the documents which are shown during the inspection. And the general manager and quality manager stated that multiple documents provided were in fact falsified for the purpose of this inspection. So maybe bringing back a bit James into this training, what do you think? What are the root causes for these two data integrity issues?
Well, Ulrich, you know, in German you always say that der Fisch fängt am Kopf an zu stinken, which means the fish starts to stink at the head. This is a head of a company issue. This is a quality culture issue. If you look at things like this, it's very clear that something in the organization from the top down is asking for trouble or basically not implementing the quality culture by design. So when we look at quality culture, we need to embrace quality. We need to have it from the top level, and the most senior a person in the organization needs to really live quality and say, this is what we're going to do as an organization. So we don't want to not have findings, and we don't want to not ever have any CAPAs. What we want to do is make sure that we can make the best product and that we can get the best medicine out to patients. That's what it needs to be. And if we have any quality deficiencies in that, we can learn from those and of course make it better. And also thank you very much for that comment that we see here in the chat. Unqualified human factor. That's another nice way to put it out there. Yes. Back to you, Ulrich.
Yeah, thank you, James. So exactly the second finding is a very, very big one. If you are here in this scenario, it's also very difficult to change from outside. So when the inspector comes and you get this finding, it's too late, you can say. In the first scenario, we got a mixture, which was also stated by some of our participants. Thank you very much for that. It's a mixture. So we got this technical part and we got the quality culture part. I just wanted to bring both to show you the continuum. So of course, you always have this kind of quality culture issues if something goes wrong by the human. But if it's so far, you're lost, of course. Bringing that back, what James just said, I think that's exactly the point we must make here. The very first point, if we think about quality culture, is management. And the PICS guideline on data integrity, which came out July 2021, I think, has an own chapter on organizational influences on data integrity. So, of course, we need to have a data governance system, as shown in the slide before. However, the management engagement is key. So what does management have to do in order to be able to foster quality culture? There have to be clear expectations set. There needs to be a high level of awareness. It should be clear how issues are to be handled. And this is a very important part. We're getting from less important to more important. Lead by example. I think that's very clear, also with James' word in alignment. We really need to also live the passion, so to say. Live the passion that we want to create meaningful products for our patients. This is the pathetic part about it. Now comes the very practical one, and the one where it often also fails: resources. So of course, management needs also to drive the right decisions so that there are enough resources in place in order to be able to maintain the quality culture and to maintain data integrity. The classical example is, oh yes, we should review audit trails. Could you do this on top of your work? Guess what? This will not work because, of course, the investigation coming out of the audit trails will not be probably done because the person in charge for these reviews does not have the time and the resource allocated. So I think this is one very practical part where we have to really consider management to have the sponsorship also for quality. So unacceptable practices must be defined, consequences should be clear. And from these points, I want to state out to enable the quality unit. This is a very, very key point, so that the quality unit, we are speaking here for the quality assurance, that they are really enabled to act. And we can find this in the warning letters. Here's a very nice example from 2021, where we have more or less exactly this definition in. Here we have the response section. This is always very interesting because here the FDA can directly tell us what we should do. And it doesn't take as long as in a guideline to write that. So FDA tells us here, we should management should ensure that the quality unit is given the authority and the resource to effectively function, and also describe how top management supports quality assurance with a timely provision of resources. That's exactly the point. So what does it help me if I cannot do my job? Interestingly, we directly have the next step behind it. We should proactively address emerging issues and assure a continuing state of control. So I think that is more or less a nice definition of quality culture or quality intelligence. So we should really proactively address our issues, and we should have this continuing state of control. This vigilant monitoring is now very present in very many 483s. You can find this clauses very often. Is that new? No, of course it's not. It's just the citation according to the data integrity guideline, Q&A guideline from FDA in 2018, where we have more or less the same wording. In the absence of management support of a quality culture, quality systems, can break down. And this leads to CGMP non-compliance. Okay, I think here the agency was relatively clear. This is not surprising, but it's important to be said. The next fact was surprising for me. Last week, Peter Baker had a GMP hot seat. He calls a session where he talks to another expert that way with live QA. I can very much recommend the sessions. And he had George Ball, who is a professor in Indiana. And they showed an interesting result. Dangerous products are recalled faster when women are on the board. So this, on the first hand, I wouldn't have expected that, but there is a thorough research behind it. So we do have a big sample size, and it was scored in different in a scientific way from these professors. And here's the result in one view. So on the one hand, we had a shorter recall time for severe recalls, so where it's really, really urgent. And we don't speak of an all-female board here. Yeah, we are just speaking of a non-all-male board. So one female on the board. And furthermore, the low severity recalls were also much higher. It was much more often given to the public that there is a problem than kept secretly to the company. And this seems to be a pattern between in behavior of women and men, that men are more protective for their company. It was also researched in other instances, not in the pharmaceutical industry only, but you see the same author also had a research that women in the C-suite change how companies think. James, what would your wife say to this finding? Is it similar?
Oh, I think we can agree that a mixed board is good, right? It's good to have
Yeah.
multiple vantage points within there, and obviously, yes, it's very good to get another input from things, and that's what I'm going to say because I know we're recording the session. So, yes,
Yeah, very
that's
good.
my official answer.
Yes, and you made a good point. Probably it's not in the scientific data now, but probably it's also a matter of diversity of different mindsets within the board, which are probably helpful to foster quality culture. Again, this underlines the importance of the management. Now let's go away from the top level. Let's go to the shop floor level. What really happens when the operator is doing his work or her work? And PDA gives us a nice human factors matrix, which can us explain which kind of errors we have to get more insights. So the human error is here separated in unintentional act and intentional act. From my experience, I can say that the unintentional acts are by far the more dominant ones, and there is a gray zone in between. That's what I also can say. We will see that in the next slide. So we got the thinking errors. I think they are relatively straightforward for us. Processes and procedures are not so well written. This causes errors. Training might not be appropriate. The importance of a topic like data integrity might not be through the organization, which we can call knowledge gap. Then we got the action errors. Here it already gets more interesting. The one is the attention failure. Could be in two directions. The one is that I'm more or less bored out. So I got an unchallenging task to do the whole day. And therefore, I'm doing my job as a human being very badly because we are not so good in these kind of tasks. Or vice versa. I think that occurs more often that we don't have enough time to fulfill our task because we got time pressure. Our desk is too full, and therefore we make quick through the desk. So here we got a strong correlation to the resources part. Then we got the intentional act, like fraud, so actively caused violations by malicious intent and misconduct. What helps against this? On the one hand, be a model for the values, we told this before, and also to always make the whole company aware of the impact. Potentially, the company can get out of the business. Potentially, then the medication, which might be life-saving or improve lives, will not be at the patients. So we are not producing an unimportant pen or toy, but we are producing medication. And of course, have controls in place. Going more into this intentional part, the ISPE and others published the fraud triangle. We got here three dimensions, which are worth to think about. The one is pressure. I think this is one we can relate most. Opportunity and rationalization. So pressure example could be that we got that we omit data because the time allocated for my task is inadequate. No? Maybe we got the wrong matrices. Maybe we push our product through and don't leave time for any out of specifications for that. Then we got opportunity. This goes also a bit into the technical part. The finding number one in our little exercise, you shouldn't have the ability to impact the data. However, there will always be instances where you have the ability. Residual risk will always persist, and that's when then the quality culture or the human part comes into play. And rationalization is maybe the more challenging or difficult one to tackle. It's rationalized that we do something, and human is very good in that, because we are always going with predefined assumptions into situation. Give you a simple example. Let's say we have a very young analyst and started newly in a big pharmaceutical company, and the analyst measures something which looks odd, which could be an out of specification. Now, the young analyst maybe rationalizes that the company is so good that this result shouldn't occur, and maybe I, as young analyst, did something wrong. So I prefer to measure it again and not report this case. This goes then also together with the pressure, and it depends a lot how open my error culture is at this place and how well I can report issues. Just as an example, so this can happen, be aware of this rationalization part. Overall, the biggest enemy of data or of objective decisions is, of course, bias, which is always subjective. And therefore, I think this is a good example that the mind of the analyst is biased from the beginning. The third, concept I want to bring in is the 6 dimensions of cultural excellence from the ISPE. They published the Cultural Excellence Report in 2017. It's not the newest, but it's really good. So I recommend to have a look at that. And here we have the different dimensions which come in place. We talked about leadership and vision. We talked about mindset and attitudes. Of course, you can imagine that this is very important. One other point, I will come back to that later, is Gemba walks. Gemba walks can be a very helpful tool in order to foster quality culture, and structural enablers or cultural enablers, however you want to call it. This is a very interesting or good concept, in particular, to develop a learning organization. You could think about developing learning groups, dedicate some time from the working time, from your staff, to learning and knowledge. I think that will be worth it. You can form expert groups on this, and therefore capture external knowledge, like, for example, knowledge from congresses, but also from publications, from papers, from books, and so on. I talked to Michael Torok. He's giving often talks at the DIA, where the conference has been last week. Also, James was there and is with Genentech. And yeah, he talked about these concepts at the DIA meeting last year, and this was very, very interesting. And I think it's also not such a high burden to get into that. You can start small and run pilots on that. Of course, there are other structural enablers besides these learning organizations, proactively problem solving, and influence and recognize organizational change. If you have any questions, then please feel free to put them in. As this is currently not the case, I will proceed with the next chapter, and this brings back again our audience. This is what I show now as part of a fictive quality program. You know, these posters or something which are hanging around in pharmaceutical manufacturing sites where we have the current initiative. And often there are also quality initiatives. I called mine here always and everywhere. So we got here 4 points: reduce deviation backlog to less than 30, reduce deviations by 10%, implement data integrity action plan, and implement our new Annex 1 action plan. So take a moment. We'll give the audience 10 seconds for that to think before we go into a discussion. What do you think about this topic? And of course, what would you change? Maybe James, you as representant, what would you think about this quality program, awareness campaign, however you call it? And if you think unmuted, it's even better.
That's wonderful. Yes, technical difficulties here. Wonderful. Yes, everyone, feel free to also put your comments in the chat, or as we said, into the Q&A session. And as you can see here in this example, what you're putting together, there's a couple of things that need to happen, that need to be done, right? Let's look at those points, right? If we look at the quality attributes, that very first one, that's a little bit, right, that kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. Implementing action annex 1, this is something that we should all be doing. Having clear action plans so that we know how we want to bring things together are also very important, because then we have traceability, we have measurements. But reducing the number of deviations, right? If we're going to reduce defects and deviations, what kind of a culture are we building? Are we making the product better because of it, or are we just asking people to not report it anymore? Right. So that's kind of the main point. And I know this is a fictional example, but we have seen examples of project managers speaking with team members of different projects, saying, I'd like these deviations to be closed at our next review. And then lo and behold, 2 days before the next review, all deviations are closed. And when we go in and speak with those team members and we interview them, we said, well, how did you close them? And they said, well, I clicked on close. Project manager told me to close. And I was like, but did you go through the right? True stories here. But the point is, we have to go through an analysis. We have to be able to take those learnings and understand, how can we better foster equality within our organization. So if something does go wrong, it's good. It should be embraced. Um, I spoke about this in a previous implementation and a previous webinar that we had done, and this is a true story. I was in Latin America for multiple years, and we were doing large scale system implementations. And one of the key issues that we did to motivate the team to find multiple issues before it actually went live and had an effect to everyone else is, we said the team that can find the most issues and the most defects, they actually got a trip to go to Florida to go to Disney. So that was actually a motivator to find issues. And it was a big change in the quality culture, because we didn't just want to say, um, let's find less issues. What we wanted to say was, let's find the most critical issues so that we can really get the best product out the door.
Yeah.
Back to you, Ulrich.
Yeah, that's a very, very good example. So vice versa. And the example here is not so fictive as it should be, but it stays fictive for now. So if you work with matrices, which you also should do, then be aware of the incentives. Here we got one comment from the audience. So reducing the deviation backlog, that makes sense. So I would agree with that. Yeah, to enforce the time limits until closed, deviations can be reduced by making changes to avoid them. That's what we got from the audience. Exactly, that's true. In the first place, to proactively have the feedback, but just reducing the deviations by a number, that's of course wrong. And I will show some other maturity matrices from the FDA in a moment. But be very careful with the deviations and the out of X terms when it goes on matrices, because you could really create severe harm on that. So thank you for the feedback. Now, this question I got from a recent webinar with Redica, where I gave a webinar on data integrity to quality intelligence. And of course, I also spoke a bit about quality culture. And I like this question. Now, let's assume we got our senior leadership in the boat for our program. What would now be the best first steps you can draw from in order to get forward? So what are really applicable steps? And for that, I would now like you to respond to a very brief questionnaire survey. poll, you call it, that's the word, which I just opened while I'm going through this content. So I have a question: to your knowledge, which of these tools do you use for supporting your company's quality culture? And I name some. It's Gemba walks, questionnaires, quality culture matrices, and data integrity awareness campaigns or other awareness campaigns. We don't want to only focus it on data integrity. So please take a time and answer it. You got multiple answers so that you don't have to only choose one. And this is exactly, while this poll fills up a bit, this is exactly what I would propose as good starting steps. So now we got our management on board. We can work on the quality culture. One short-term high return of investment thing we can do is doing Gemba walks. I think some of you already heard the term. Gemba means, as Japanese, and means where it happens, so the actual place. So what you do is you bring together management and shop floor staff. So the management, which is responsible for a part of the site, really goes to the shop floor and interacts with the shop floor. Or you could also bring together the quality unit more with the shop floor. Why is it so helpful? I think the main part is the engagement. So it's just better if you're there face to face and you see each other. It's not like the QA person on the tower next to my building, but the QA person actually comes, I don't know which basis, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever. So this is the one part, and the other part is compared to assessments or audits, the situation is much more open. So you can much more follow the questions of the auditees is the wrong word, of the Gemba walked people, however you want to call it, and you get much more insights into the topics because the situation is much more open. So you can bridge gaps and really encourage continuous improvement. The second part I would like to propose is conduct quality questionnaires, quality culture questionnaires. You don't exactly have to name them that way, but also this is a method to interact with your frontline staff. So examples, what you could ask is rate openness to report errors. And there you, of course, already see it is really important that these questionnaires are anonymous, so that nobody has to be afraid, especially if there would be a bad rating for the openness to report errors. Nobody has to be afraid to report, to fill out the questionnaire. You could also ask for opportunities to bring in proposals for improvement, so going into continuous improvement. Also, a good question would be whether the staff is clear on the data-related roles and responsibilities. So what are my responsibilities? For example, if I'm working in a lab, what are my responsibilities concerning to the data, and who is the admin, who is the data owner, and so on. I think that can help to also get feedback on that. And you can, of course, also ask open questions, or you should ask open questions, like, for example, which are areas where you want to improve your knowledge. So this can help. Both instances is very important to follow up, not just to let it lie around, but to follow up, to repeat Gemba walks, to give feedback to the sites you visited or to the areas you visited. And the same is, of course, the quality culture questionnaire. You have to bring something out of that. We talked a bit about matrices, and we'll have it in a moment, but I think that's also something which you can enable. It's not straightforward. You can make a talk on its own on this topic. If somebody is in detail interested, please feel free to reach out. There's also some material, for example, from ISP or PDA, which works on this part. And last but not least, to run awareness campaigns, to have really something, for example, on the intranet. It does not have to be very serious or many words, because we got our SOP framework, which is usually always already a lot of words, very complicated. And for the frontline stuff, it might be uninteresting, but something fun, something small bites, which are eatable, which are fun, which can bring your company forward. In all of these areas, we have worked previously, and yeah, all the topics are doable and are well implementable. I was just shortly stuck because I was searching for my poll. So the results are interesting. We got 24 responses. 14 of this 24. Oh, it calculates the percentage of the total votes, which doesn't make sense. But 14 of 24 responses have performed Gemba walks. That's quite a good value. Questionnaires, maybe something you can think about it. Only 7 of 24 did that so far. Quality culture matrices are implemented in 15 of 24 instances. And data integrity or other awareness campaigns are the winner, so to say, with 18 of 24. So this is already quite widespread, which makes sense. So think about those you haven't implemented, and maybe it can be a nice add-on. It can also be combined. I can imagine that the questionnaires together with the awareness campaign fit very well together. You can write an article around that or have a short video of the results. Good. This brings us to the last chapter of this talk. Of course, I want to bring it to something. We don't want to have quality culture only to have it. Of course, we want to enable data integrity and Alcoa, but we also want to step forward with that. So this is a roadmap from data integrity to quality intelligence. And to get started with that, I want to refer back to the last year published quality management maturity white paper from FDA, which has some very good content if you think especially about matrices and governing the quality management system. And one key fact here is, firstly, it was written with the intent of drug shortages, to reduce drug shortages. The question is, how can a company rate the suppliers to make the supply chain more stable? So that's a basic intention at the beginning of this guideline. But also for any other company, it brings a lot of insight, naming the CGMPs, so the rules, as the minimum you have to fulfill, implementing ICHQ-10 on quality management system, on pharmaceutical quality management systems, which augments the CGMPs and leads to an effective quality system throughout the life cycle of a product. And then we go further to the quality maturity matrices. And here is some examples. Tom Hui presented them on last year's PDA data integrity workshop. I don't want to go through all of them. However, what I want to show you is some of them are lying in the quality management system. So pharmaceutical quality system effectiveness, like kappa effectiveness, repeat deviation rate, something different than the total deviation rate, things like that. But also many of them are from the business. So like, for example, a right first time rate in the lab or in manufacturing. And this is one key point also out of this paper that we need to consider to get it more together, to have the quality system, the quality unit in the same boat as the business unit, in a matter of bringing the quality forward. And I think that's also one output of this paper and the research they did behind it. In the high mature organizations, there are no separated business and quality objectives. They are linked together because, of course, the business objective falls on the feet again if the quality of the product is not sufficient. If we get a warning letter, if we get a 483, this also affects business, of course. I think that's a very important part of that. So we need to stop thinking in these silos. And then we are able to drive it forward. Here's a quality intelligence roadmap. We're currently working on that, also on behalf of PDA. Peter Baker created this one. We want to publish that in a PDA letter. So this is a roadmap how you can come from the beginning, data integrity, from a time frame point of view, to making real use of your data. which we call quality and intelligence, have relationality in the data so that you can cross-combine lab results with manufacturing input parameters and so on. And in between, there are more steps and you cannot circumvent one. So you need to have data governance in place. You need to have quality culture, which we were talking today about, in place. Data governance is also now reflected more in the PICS guideline. There's a very good section, I mentioned this before, on data governance, in the Data Integrity PICS guideline from July 2021. And it's also more reflected in the ICHQ9, the revision, which came out beginning of this year. And here we could also name the quality management maturity paper I just mentioned before. So this is the step we took today from here to here. But of course, I can invite you to join in other webinars, but also in the workshop. I mentioned I've been in the States 1 week ago. We will repeat our workshop in Dublin, in Europe, which might be more reachable for most of you, where we'll go together with Peter Baker through the topics of quality intelligence. We had a very detailed and nice discussion on validation of artificial intelligence. We made some hands-on exercises on dashboarding. So how can we really visualize our data? And we had some very intense and nice discussions. And yeah, it would be nice if somebody of you would join for this session. Good. Bringing it to the Q&A. We have one question. James, do you want to take over?
Sure, I will. And while we're doing this, feel free. We have a few minutes left on the end of our call here to add questions into the Q&A, and I'll be moderating those and looking at those as well to make sure that we can get him to Ulrich to see the points on there. But Ulrich, well, I'll just start you off with one of them here. Are there any specific surveys to know the quality culture status of a facility?
Yes, there are. So we have different possibilities. The ISPE guideline on data integrity gives a very broad possibility to use. So there's a maturity map in it where you can also draw quality culture matrices, but also other data integrity matrices. In my experience, this is very good, but it's too heavy. So I would scale it down a bit. We made this experience when using that. I would scale it down to some more important ones and not, getting, there's always a danger of getting lost in assessment. Death by assessment. I read an article, and I think this is a danger here. So start small if you don't have the matrices in place, but start, and the ISPE is a good starting point. What I mentioned before, David Talmash from PDA, they're always giving a 2-day training on where you can also talk about these topics, and of course ask us to implement something. We have all the material in place. So one question I got in the recent webinar, James, maybe this is a good one for you, because you're an experienced auditor also, you're doing audits. The question was very good. How can the assessment of quality culture be part of an audit? And what are symptoms of good quality culture that an auditor would find? It's not an easy one.
Having a few technical issues here. I'm
okay, should I
take over the next piece? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. That's a good way not to answer a question. No, just kidding. So my answer on this would be really that it's often not a direct measure. And I think data integrity is a good place to go. It's a very good place to start because you can see issues with data like a fever thermometer on a quality culture. So if data gets locked away, if data gets somehow falsified, as we saw in this experiment, this is an ultimate signal for you as an auditor or for an inspector. Always also, I go to the real data, so not to the so-called white system, the quality system, so the deviations which or the out of specifications which made it into the OS log, but rather going to the source data, to the raw data. This is also what FDA inspectors or any other inspectors would do. So you really look at the different data sets. You really go through the process, and you really see where the lapses are and where the issues are. And last point to this concern, I think it's also always important to have sound risk assessments in place. So to also have a story or a thought behind how you're acting. So it could be that a company decides not to review a particular part of the data because we got huge amount of data when we do a manufacturing run, right? So we will not review everything, but it should be actively clear why we don't review something. And this is also part of the culture that we have, that we are doing, acting proactively, proactive risk acceptance, as it's also stated out in the ICHQ-9, and that we do not passively fall into risks. I think that's one important point you can get out of that.
Perfect, George. Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Is it working again? Okay, great. So we did get another question just popped up in the middle. Could we get links to the guidelines? Yes, definitely. So
Mhm.
on one side, we have our blogs published on these topics where we do have the links to the guidelines. If you look at the current guidelines, the most relevant ones is your ICH guidelines Q8, Q9, and Q10. If you search for the ICH Q8, ICH Q9, ICH Q10, you'll actually find the newest topics on this. There is also a plethora of FDA guidelines, EMA guidelines, and MHRA and other industry guidelines that we're referencing here as well. If you would like the information that we showed today, if you'd like to get more information about that, just reach out to us after the call. No problem. You can reach out to us. We'll be happy to share this information that we gave you today. Also, like I said, this session is being recorded, so we'll also be publishing that in the upcoming days as well. So we're happy to share that information.
Cool.
Ulrich, I do have another question here that's in our question list, and I think it's really relevant to today's way of doing things. When companies are facing a challenging economic situation, why should they invest in quality culture when they're trying to survive? Right, so this companies
Yeah.
just are trying to make it right now. We just got out of a pandemic. We got crazy economic situations. What's in it for them to put into a quality culture?
Yeah. The answer is if they don't, they will fail anyway. So I think there is a lot. Yeah, there is something true to that. So it of course, where are these lapses coming from? This big from management, and there's a financial component behind it. That's for sure. So we outsourced a lot of our operations to other countries where the work is much cheaper, and yeah, there is a financial component behind it. There's no doubt on that. But if you don't do it, and if you want to be seriously in the market, um, then you have to invest in any kind of quality in compliance, and you have to really take the investment, because otherwise you will be swarmed out of the market. Let it be by the FDA or let it be by recalls from other agencies. By the way, this can also be and it's encouraged also in this quality management maturity paper, um, to take it as a vendor selection criterion, yeah, to also search for these topics when you select your vendor, because this is what enables you to have a long time supplier vendor relationship. Because if you have one stinky vendor in your supply chain, yeah, you will run into problems with your product earlier or later, mostly earlier. Okay.
Looking at supply chain, I think there's two components there. Ulrich, one is there's not a right way to do a wrong thing, right? And when you look at your entire supply chains, we did see that during the pandemic in other industries. If we looked at the car industry, there were reports of it takes 100,000 parts to make a car and only one to not make it. right?
Mhm.
And if we look at the drug supply chain and we look at the drug shortages that are out there, every component is important, and we're relying on our patient safety, on our health, on our parents, siblings, loved ones, kids' health to work. So it's again much more intentional than only a car as that perspective. So
Yeah.
so with that, Ulrich, I think we're at time. Um, would you like to give our audience any further closing points? Otherwise, I would wrap us up here.
No, thank you for joining everybody. Thank you, James, for moderating. Thank you for the questions. And yeah, looking forward to meeting you again. James.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ulrich. So, thank you all for attending our session. As always, we have another poll that we're putting out there. We'd love to reach out to you more. We really enjoy doing these sessions and getting your inputs. Afterwards, let us know if you have any questions. Let us know what you'd like to additionally know as I put in the poll. Let us know if there's other points that you'd like us to look at in the future. So I'm really putting out there what are some of the things that you'd like to see from us in the future, and how would you like to continue this conversation. As Ulrich said, he was in Boston last week with Peter Baker. We have a joint class session that we conducted with together with Peter Baker in the Northeastern University. We're doing the same session again in Ireland in the second half of the year. That we're looking forward to doing. So I believe third quarter, end of third quarter, beginning of fourth quarter. We're looking at putting that on the agenda. Also, these webinars, be on the lookout for them. Gladly subscribe to our mailing list. We promise not to spam you too much, but we will be sending you out updates and information. We write blogs on the topic, and we want to keep you informed. Our mission or our passion is basically supporting you in your mission, and we want to make sure that we can jointly work on these topics of drug shortages and make sure that all of us, when we become patients, are in the best hands. So thank you again, Ulrich, for driving this. Thank you all for participating. If we look at this just recent poll here, we can see quality intelligence is the winner of this pool. So Ulrich, we're going to need to do another session on this, shortly followed by data integrity in the lab, as well as cloud compliance. So all these
Oh,
topics are great topics, and we look forward to reaching out to you again in our next session. So thank you all, and have a great rest of the week.
thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.